They said she was just late, that maybe she stopped for breakfast or forgot to call. But I knew something was wrong the moment I saw her bike standing straight, kickstand down, papers still in the basket. No wind, no noise, just the soft hum of the morning and that single quiet thing out of place. It wasn't panic. Not yet. Just that cold tug in your gut when the world suddenly tilts and nothing looks quite right. That was the start. Before we begin, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury, and make sure no name stays forgotten. My name's Nora Brenner. I'm 47 now, but I was just a kid growing up in Dayton, Ohio when Katie Deming disappeared. I didn't know her well, not really, but I knew her face. Everybody did. She was the girl with the paper route, same streets every morning, same canvas satchel hair always tucked behind one ear. If you were up early enough, you might catch her nod as she passed earbuds in Never Late. I lived on the other side of town back then. My parents rented a small place not far from the rail line, and I'd ride my bike past her neighborhood to get to school. That was the kind of town Dayton was: old sidewalks, porches with wind chimes, corner stores that still sold penny candy. We were the kind of place where people knew each other's names. Kids walked to school. Doors stayed unlocked till sundown. You trusted the quiet. My dad was an electrician. My mom cleaned houses part-time. Money was tight, but we didn't feel poor. Life was steady, predictable. The news came on at 6, and we watched it together in the living room. I remember sitting cross-legged on the carpet when Katie's face first flashed across the screen. She was smiling, in the photo blue root cap freckles just visible. The anchor said she'd left for her morning route on August 15, 1987, and hadn't come home. They showed her picture again the next night, and again after that. But something in the tone had shifted. The questions changed from "where is she" to "did she leave on her own?" By the end of the month, it was barely mentioned. Just another line in the police blotter. Teen presumed runaway. No foul play suspected. But that didn't sit right with me, and it sure as hell didn't sit right with her mother. I wasn't a detective yet, not even close. I didn't wear a badge until much later. But some things just stick with you. The way people looked past it. The way grown men shrugged and called her a restless kid. Like a girl who brought exact change for lunch and practiced clarinet every Tuesday would just vanish because she felt like it. Still, time rolled forward. Years blurred. I finished school, joined the academy, started working cold cases after a decade on patrol. You learn not to carry everything. But Katie stayed in the back of my mind like a file you never quite put away. Then, one morning in late March, I got a call from County Works. They were clearing brush near an old electrical substation place hadn't been touched in years. A crew found a rusted shed tucked behind the lot, covered in vines. Inside was a satchel canvas beige with the initials KD, faded along the flap. Tucked underneath it, they found something else. That was the moment everything started to shift. That was the moment the past started to breathe again. The call came in just after sunrise. County maintenance had been clearing brush near an old electrical substation when they uncovered a shed that wasn't on any map, tucked behind a wall of vines and collapsed fencing. The crew said it looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. I was at my desk by the time the first photos came through, rusted padlocks snapped clean off crates piled high inside some janitorial shelving, an old office chair with a cracked armrest. At first glance, it was junk. But then they found the canvas satchel. Beige. Corners frayed. And on the flap still just legible despite the dust and age were the initials KD. I didn't need to guess. I already knew. I drove straight to the scene. The shed had been cordoned off, floodlights set up even though the morning light was strong enough by then. Officer Grace Holden was already inside photographing every inch. The satchel had been tagged and laid out on an evidence table just outside the structure. I stood over it for a while, just looking. 14 years. That bag had been missing just as long. But it wasn't the only thing they'd uncovered. One of the field techs had noticed a cracked paver near the back wall slightly off from the rest. When they pried it up, the soil beneath gave easily. Wrapped in plastic sealed with layers of duct tape was a bundle just small enough to make your chest tighten. Water damaged, coated in dirt. It took almost an hour to confirm it was human remains. Child-sized, bones wrapped in denim and a striped shirt worn thin. I didn't say anything right away, just knelt beside the crew and watched them work under the lights. Back at the department, I pulled Katie's cold case file from storage. The spine was soft pages, yellowed. The last note clipped to the front subject, likely runaway. No viable leads. File inactive. That was it. A 16-year-old girl vanishes without a trace, and that's how the file ends. I opened my laptop, cross-referenced the digital archives. Nothing had ever been recovered. No bag, no personal effects, not even her Walkman. But now we had a satchel and a body. Except when the scan came back from forensics, it wasn't Katie. Dr. Ellen Rivera, the forensic anthropologist assigned to the case, showed me the dental overlay herself. "Doesn't match," she said. "We can rule her out completely." She pointed to the clavicle, the jawline. "This one's closer to 13, maybe 14, and based on the clothing, death likely occurred in 1986. That stopped me. Katie vanished in August of '87. Whoever this was had died nearly a year earlier. I sat with that for a long time, Katie's satchel found above the body of another girl. Different names, different years, same shed. I asked Rivera to keep me posted while I pulled entries from the National Database for Missing Teens in the surrounding counties from 1986. It didn't take long to narrow it down. One case stood out: Rachel Myers. 15. Last seen walking home from band practice in Riverside. 2 towns over. No obvious threats, no signs of struggle, no suspects. She just never made it home. Her file was light. A few statements, a school photo. Rachel had braces, long brown hair, parted in the middle, and wore a small silver cross. I printed the photo and laid it next to the scan from the remains. It was hard to say, but something about the posture, the height, it made sense. I called Rivera the next morning and asked her to recheck the dental with Rachel's history. An hour later, she called back. "It's her. I brought both files, Katie's and Rachel's, to the chief's office, laid them on his desk, and waited." He flipped through the pages in silence, the kind of man who didn't speak unless he had to. Finally, he looked up. "You think they're connected?" I told him what I knew. Katie's satchel was found in a shed with Rachel's remains. 2 girls 14 months apart. No clear suspects in either case. 1 location. That wasn't a coincidence. He gave a slow nod. "Reopen both," he said. "Start with the forensics. Go back to the beginning. If there's a pattern, find it." That afternoon, I drove out to a small apartment complex just off Elm Street. The address listed on the original report was still valid. The woman who opened the door was older now, of course, but I recognized her from the press conference footage I'd seen years back, Margaret Deming. Navy cardigan, eyes darker than I remembered, sharper. She looked at me for a long moment before stepping aside. "You're the detective," she said. I nodded. "You'd better come in." The apartment was quiet, neat. A photo of Katie in a blue dress stood on the mantel next to a ceramic angel and an unopened birthday card. We sat at the kitchen table. Margaret poured tea without asking. She didn't need to. "I know what they found," she said. "The bag. It's hers, isn't it?" I told her it was. The initials had faded, but they were still there. She nodded, staring down at the cup in her hands. She never let her brother touch that bag. Treated it like gold. She kept talking about the $28 Katie had saved in her drawer, about how her paper route was always marked up with tips and corrections. How she'd just cleaned her clarinet the night before. "She didn't run away," Margaret said. "She didn't even take her Walkman. She never went anywhere without that thing." I laid out the inventory sheet from the original report. Bicycle found upright. Kickstand down. Papers still in the basket. No signs of struggle. No known witnesses. She read it silently, then gave a bitter smile. "They told me it was a phase." She left the room for a moment and returned with a taped-up shoebox. Inside were photos. Katie in her band uniform. Katie with a birthday cake. One caught my attention, a homecoming photo. Katie in a red dress, her hand resting on the shoulder of a tall, skinny boy in a clip-on tie. "David Sullivan," Margaret said. "They dated a few months sophomore year. Something changed after they broke up. I asked if anything had happened. Her son Tommy walked in just then, work jacket, dusty boots still on. He nodded when she introduced us, then sat at the table and looked at the photo. 'Used to be my friend,' he said. 'Didn't stay that way.' Tommy said Katie had asked their dad not to confront David after the breakup. She just wanted it to end, but she'd changed after that. Slept with the lights on, avoided going out at night. Wouldn't go near Al's Pizza, their usual hangout. She said she didn't like the way he looked at her anymore. I asked if anyone ever questioned David. Tommy gave a hollow laugh. They didn't ask me anything. Said he was at college. Not relevant. That was the phrase they used. Later that night, I sat at my desk and pulled the old yearbook. Found Katie's photo, then the band list beneath it. One of the names jumped out, Jennifer Walsh. It took a few days to track her down. She went by Jennifer Collins, now lived up in Milwaukee, worked nights at St. Francis General. When she finally called me back, I told her I was revisiting a cold case. There was a pause, then a sigh. I remember everything she said. We met at a diner near the harbor. Jennifer looked tired but steady. She said Katie changed once she started dating David. At first, it was the usual high school stuff. Then he got possessive. She quit things. Pulled away. One night, 2 weeks before she vanished, Jennifer saw him grab Katie's arm in a parking lot. She couldn't hear what was said, but Katie had told her later. He said, "You'll regret this." Jennifer never told anyone. She thought it was just breakup drama. "We were 16, she said. I didn't even know she was missing until the Monday after. Back in Dayton, I reworked the case board. Katie and Rachel were both in band. Both vanished near familiar routes. Both had patterns routines anyone could learn. The original investigations had treated them like separate events. But now I knew better. There was a thread running through both of them. I just didn't know where it would lead yet. But it wouldn't be long before the first real thread pulled tight. A man who knew Katie, who had seen her just days before she disappeared. A man no one had ever properly questioned. And he had one story that would change everything. I scheduled the meeting for the following morning. David Sullivan still lived in the area about 45 minutes north, working out of a small insurance office tucked between a tax service and a nail salon in a strip mall off Route 17. I didn't go in with my badge showing, just walked through the glass door like anyone else. He was standing behind the desk when I came in, tie loosened, shirt a little too big around the collar, posture still boyish. He offered a polite smile and a handshake. "You're the one who called about coverage?" he asked. I shook his hand once. "Detective Nora Brenner. I'm here to ask about someone you knew in high school." His smile faded. "This isn't about insurance." I didn't say anything, just waited. He sat down slowly, as if something heavy had just settled into the room. "You're here about Katie." It wasn't a question. We sat across from each other. He folded his hands and kept his eyes on the desk. "Said they'd dated for a few months sophomore year. She was smart, he told me. Didn't pretend, didn't play games. She always said what she meant." I asked him what happened. He rubbed the back of his neck. "College. I got into Miami early, started orientation that summer. She came up to visit one weekend and found out I'd been seeing someone. I didn't lie to her. I told her straight. She cried, left early. I asked if they spoke again after that. He nodded. She called a few times, left messages. Then she stopped. I figured she was moving on. I didn't interrupt him. He kept talking like the words had been sitting too long. When the news hit, I thought maybe she'd run off. I wanted to believe that because it would have been easier. I kept thinking she'd show up, that she'd call and curse me out. Something. I asked if anyone from the department ever interviewed him. He shook his head once. A guy from the sheriff's office called my dorm. I told him where I was, and he said they were just checking boxes. Never followed up. I came home for break and offered to come in. Nobody called. I stayed quiet, just watching him. After a pause, he looked up again. There's something else. I never told anyone. Didn't think it mattered. But maybe it does. I told him to go ahead. He said it happened a couple of weeks before he left for college. He and Katie were getting pizza just a normal night. He went to park the car, and by the time he got back, there was a man standing near her talking. He looked off, David said. Older, mid-30s, maybe a little more. Ball cap, brown hair, square jaw. I couldn't hear what he said, but she looked uncomfortable. As soon as I walked up, the guy backed off. Said he was asking for directions, then left. I asked what Katie said afterward. David rubbed his palms together slow. She told me the guy asked if she delivered papers. Said he liked seeing her in the mornings. Said she seemed friendly. She brushed it off, but I could tell it bothered her. I asked if she recognized him. She said she thought he might have worked for one of the newspaper distributors. Said maybe he'd shown up at the supply dock a few times. She wasn't sure. I wrote down what I could description vehicle anything. David remembered the car gray boxy older even for that time. He said Katie mentioned seeing a similar one near a neighborhood she didn't usually cover about a week before. I thanked him for his time. As I stood, he asked, "You think that guy has something to do with what happened to her?" I told him I didn't know yet. But I believed Katie was scared, and someone was watching her. Back at the station, I started pulling city records. I wanted to find anyone working for paper distribution companies in the area in 1986 and 1987. It took a couple of hours to get into the public archive system and another hour to narrow the list. Most of the pages were old scans, smudged, partially cropped, or scribbled over. I looked for names listed as route coordinators, men who would have had access to carrier maps and scheduling rosters. Only two names stood out, Dennis Kalman and Reed Mallory. Kalman had passed away in '91. That left one. Reed Mallory was still alive. DMV records listed him at an address in Brookfield, Indiana, small town, maybe 1,500 people. Power records confirmed he paid utilities in cash every month. A local hardware store listed him as part-time staff. I drove out the next morning. Brookfield was the kind of town you could miss if you blinked at the wrong intersection. One main road, 2 gas stations, a post office the size of a garage. His house was modest white siding, trimmed hedges, old Impala in the driveway. No plate on the front bumper. I parked down the block, took a time-stamped photo, then started knocking on a few doors. The woman next door, maybe early 70s, was trimming her rose bushes with a pair of dull shears. "Quiet fella," she said when I asked about Mallory. "Waves when he leaves. Keeps to himself. His wife's a strange one. Young thing never looks you in the eye." At the corner mailbox, a retired postal worker told me the same. Polite enough. Buys the local paper every Tuesday. Always has a young woman with him. Thin. Never says a word. He paused, glanced back toward the house. Thought maybe she was just shy. Or something else. The third day, I approached the house with a clipboard and a laminated badge that read Tri-County Development Survey. When Mallory answered the door, I introduced myself, told him I was confirming occupancy records for a proposed utility upgrade. He leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. "Can't take long," he said. "I've got work soon." I asked about his length of residence. He said 8, maybe 9 years. Wife's name was Christine, age 28. No children. I paused, looked at the clipboard. "We cross-check against some older property records. Ever live in Ohio-Dayton area?" He didn't blink. "Can't say I have," he said, voice even. But his eyelid twitched once. Right side, just for a second. I kept my tone casual. Came across a route coordinator from back then. Name was Reed Mallory. Had access to distribution maps. Worked with a girl named Katie Deming. His smile didn't change, but something behind it did. Doesn't ring a bell, he said. I asked if Christine was home. He said she wasn't well. PTSD didn't like strangers. The doctors say it's best she stays in, he added, shifting slightly to block the view inside the house. That everything I nodded. Thanks for your time, Mr. Mallory. Miss Brenner, he said without being told. Then he shut the door. That night, I circled back. Street was quiet, porch lights off. I wore gloves and moved quickly, collecting a used coffee cup from the blue bin near the curb. No lipstick lid off, still warm from the inside. Bagged it, sealed it, called the lab, and asked for a rush on DNA sequencing. I didn't give a full explanation, just told them I had a high-confidence trace match and needed it processed within 24 hours. The sample confirmed what I already suspected. Reed Mallory's DNA matched multiple strands embedded in Katie Deming's satchel. Not just one hair. Several. Confidence level 99.8%. Chain of custody was clean. From that moment forward, it wasn't theory anymore. It was evidence. And whatever that house was hiding, it wasn't just a lie. It was something alive. Something waiting. I knew I couldn't walk through that front door alone. The next step wasn't mine to take, not yet. But the window was closing, and whatever was happening inside that house in Brookfield, we were running out of time to stop it. I didn't go home that night. Just sat in the quiet of the records room with the case files open and the overhead bulb ticking every few minutes like it couldn't quite hold its charge. The DNA match gave us probable cause, but it didn't give us her. I kept staring at the photo of the shed, the crushed pavers, the corner where the satchel had been buried, and I wondered how long it had sat there. How many seasons had passed with no one knowing what lay underneath? I pinned Rachel Meyer's school portrait next to Katie's and looked for something I hadn't seen before. They were both in band. Both played clarinet. Both went missing on days when no one had been paying attention. One had walked home from rehearsal. The other had been out on her route before dawn. Different times, different years. But if it was the same man he hadn't chosen randomly, he'd been watching. I started cross-referencing school yearbooks from the mid-'80s. Katie's sophomore class was easy to find. Her picture was third row, fourth from the left. Small smile hair tucked neatly, eyes straight at the camera. Under the band roster, I recognized another name, Jennifer Walsh. I'd already spoken to her once briefly when I was trying to verify Katie's rehearsal schedule. At the time, she hadn't said much. Just that Katie had been reliable. Quiet. Always early. I found her contact sheet again, checked the new address, Milwaukee, now working nights at St. Francis General, and called from a department line just after 8. When she answered, her voice was flat professional. I reminded her who I was and said I was following up on a cold case. There was a pause. Then she said, "I remember everything." She agreed to meet me the next day. I drove up early and waited at a diner near the harbor, the kind of place with worn vinyl booths and a long window that looked out over the freeway. She arrived just past noon, hair clipped up, hospital badge still hanging from her coat. She slid into the booth across from me and didn't speak at first. I didn't press her. I just waited. Finally, she said, "You're here about Katie." I nodded once. She kept her eyes on the window. "I always thought someone would come eventually. I just didn't think it would take this long." She told me Katie had changed during those last few months of school. At first, it was normal teenage stuff, homecoming notes in lockers waiting after class. Then David started getting possessive. She quit the school paper. Skipped group study. Always had a reason, but none of it made sense. Jennifer said she didn't pry. "We were 16, she said quietly. "You don't think to ask more." Then she told me about the parking lot. 2 weeks before Katie disappeared, they were both at the movies. Jennifer had already crossed to her mom's car when she looked back and saw David following Katie across the lot. He grabbed her arm, she said, leaned in close. I couldn't hear what he said, but I remember how she flinched. Later, Katie told her what he'd said. "You'll regret this." She said it like she was repeating something that didn't make sense. Jennifer never told anyone. I thought it was breakup drama. I didn't know she was missing until Monday morning. By then, the cops were already saying she ran away. She looked down at her hands, thumbs pressed flat against her coffee mug. I should have told someone, even if it didn't seem like a big deal. I should have said something. I told her she was saying it now. She gave a small nod, but it didn't settle anything. After that, I drove back to the station and pulled every missing persons entry from the year before Katie vanished. I filtered by age, location, time of year. There were more names than I expected, but only one stood out. Rachel Myers, 15. Last seen walking home from band practice in June 1986. 2 towns over. No suspects. No leads. Vanished into an afternoon just like Katie had vanished into a morning. Their schedules had been regular. Predictable. Someone could have planned for that. Someone with access to route maps, school schedules, distribution records. The man David had described, the one in the ball cap who liked seeing Katie in the mornings, had asked if she delivered papers. He'd known. Back in Brookfield, the house on Curtis Drive hadn't changed. Same Impala in the driveway. Same porch light burned out. I didn't approach the door again. I just watched. Watched for the woman who never looked up, never walked more than a few feet behind him. I couldn't get a clean photo through the blinds, but the timing matched. Tuesday, the day the neighbor said he always bought the paper. Around 11:30, he came outside and walked to the corner store alone. I stayed in the car until he disappeared behind the storefront, then crossed the street and rang the neighbor's doorbell. "Mrs." Radcliffe answered with a dish towel over her shoulder. She didn't ask who I was this time, just opened the door and leaned against the frame. "You're watching him," she said. I didn't respond. She looked past me toward the sidewalk. The girl with him. I thought maybe she was sick. But it's more than that, isn't it? I asked if she'd ever heard the girl speak. She shook her head. Not once. Always quiet. Eyes on the ground. Like someone trained her not to be seen. That night I went back through the evidence log for Katie's satchel. One of the notes mentioned frayed seams near the bottom edge. Another suggested possible tearing. I'd overlooked it at first, thinking it was just wear from years of storage. But under direct light, the lining had small punctures, scrape marks. I called the lab and asked for high magnification imaging. Could be clawing, the tech said, or even nail scrapings. We'll test it. That detail stuck with me. If someone had tried to get out even briefly, it would have shown up there. Desperate movement leaves traces. The next morning, I drove back to Brookfield. Sat across from the house with a coffee and just waited. Watched him leave again, this time with the woman behind him, head-down sweatshirt, 2 large sleeves past her wrists. She didn't look up once. Even when the breeze pulled her hair back from her face, she tucked it down again. They walked in step, but not side by side. He picked up the paper. She followed. I stayed until they were back inside. Then I dialed Tom Adler at the lab and asked how fast he could move on the DNA. He asked what I had. I told him saliva from a coffee cup, no contamination, sealed chain of custody. "Rush this one," I said. "Please. The waiting is the worst part. You start to imagine things, what's happening behind the doors, what you'll find if you're right, what you'll never forgive yourself for if you're late." I didn't sleep that night, just stared at the map spread across my table, both cases marked in red, and the line between them darker than ever. When the call came in the next morning, Tom's voice didn't waver. "It's him," he said. DNA matches 3 separate strands recovered from the satchel. Confidence levels near perfect. I wrote the timestamp down in the corner of my notepad. Just a number. But I knew what it meant. We weren't dealing in questions anymore. I forwarded the file to the Dayton field office, contacted Special Agent Ruiz. They agreed we had enough for a federal warrant, kidnapping across state lines. SWAT would mobilize by sundown. But something about the timing gnawed at me. If he sensed we were closing in, he'd run, or worse. There were only 2 outcomes left now. We'd either find her, or we'd find what was left. The paperwork moved faster than expected. By late afternoon, the federal warrant had been signed. SWAT was already staging outside Louisville, prepping for a controlled entry. I sat in the corner of the Dayton field office while Agent Ruiz walked the team through the layout of the Brookfield house rooms marked by photo stills and scaled floor plans. Reed Mallory left for work at 6 a.m. Back by 12, rarely went anywhere else. Christine, the woman who stayed behind those windows, hadn't been seen outside without him. We didn't know if she was his wife, a victim, or something else entirely. But after everything we'd gathered, the DNA on the satchel, the trace matches from the lining the witness statements that had been buried for over a decade, it didn't matter. We had enough. The objective was clear. Get inside that house, get her out, and don't leave anything behind. The sun had just started to dip when the convoy pulled into position along Curtis Drive. 5 unmarked vehicles, entry teams stacked behind side hedges and fence gates. I stood behind the lead car vest snug comms line clipped to my collar, breathing slow. A soft breeze moved the tree branches just enough to rustle. Across the street porch, lights blinked on one by one like a string of alarms coming to life. At exactly 6:04, the battering ram hit the front door. First bang. Wood splintered. Then shouting federal agents as boots swept through the threshold. Room by room, the team cleared the structure. Living room, empty. Kitchen, sandwich on the counter, 1 bite, missing bread already drying at the corners. The fridge door was ajar, milk expired. In the bedroom, drawers had been yanked out halfway. Hangers still swayed from the closet rod. It looked like someone had started packing and then walked away mid-motion. Ruiz cursed under her breath. He bolted. In the spare room, a desk sagged under the weight of an old shoebox lid secured with elastic bands. I opened it with gloves. Inside were laminated IDs, all bearing Mallory's face but under different names: Edgar Mullins, Robert Mayen, Tyler Riggs. Beneath them was a second stack: female driver's licenses. Every photo showed the same face. Hair longer in some, shorter in others, but unmistakable. Same cheekbones, same eyes. Katie. Every name was different. Christine, Mitchell, Donna Wells, Amber Lee. But they were all her. Detective. One of the agents called from the kitchen. I followed him to the living room where a laptop had been recovered from under the couch. Beside it, a flash drive sat inside a plastic pouch, still warm. A tech powered it up, surveillance footage loaded onto the screen, security camera time-stamped the day before. Mallory pushing a grocery cart. Walking behind him close, but not beside, was a woman in a heavy sweatshirt. Her posture was tight, shoulders pulled forward. She never touched the cart, never spoke, just nodded when he chose items. I leaned closer to the screen. The angle wasn't ideal, but when she turned slightly to the side, I saw it. Her mouth, the slight overbite, the flicker in her eyes before she ducked her head. It was her. Katie, older now, thinner. But it was her. We tracked the car across 3 toll booths. The last confirmed sighting was 3 hours earlier, heading south toward the motel strips off I-65. State police flagged a recent check-in at a roadside lodge under the alias Robert Mahon. Paid in cash. Room 8. 1 adult male, 1 adult female, possibly a child. That was all we had. By midnight, fog had rolled in low across the lot, blanketing everything in a thick, wet hush. Flashlights were cut. Radios whispered only when needed. The motel was single-level paint peeling around the door frame's numbers, crooked on each unit. We held just out of sight while the entry team approached room 8. Ruiz gave the signal. The battering ram struck. A hard crack, then splinter. The door swung wide. Inside, water ran from the shower, echoing off the tile. A dresser had been shoved against the back wall, clothes still in piles on the floor. "Federal agents," one of the officers shouted. As they cleared the bathroom, a second team rushed around the outside. A screen window screeched open, and that's when we saw him. Mallory dropped to the grass, barefoot pants half zipped, running hard toward the tree line. I didn't think, just moved. A trooper caught him at the edge of the lot, drove him to the ground. Mallory thrashed in the mud, voice cracked and raw. "She's mine," he shouted. "She's mine," over and over like it was the only sentence he remembered. His hands were cuffed, face streaked with clay, still yelling as they dragged him to the cruiser. I turned and went back inside. She was crouched in the corner, knees pulled to her chest, shielding something with her body. Her hair hung in tangled strands across her face. The sweatshirt swallowed her frame. For a second, she didn't register me at all, just stared past eyes, unfocused mouth half open. Then I stepped forward slowly. "Katie," I said. Her head turned slightly, but she didn't blink. "You're safe now," I told her. "He can't hurt you." She looked at the door, at the hallway, then at the badge around my neck. Her arms tightened around the child tucked against her. A girl, no more than 2. Brown curls, thumb wedged into her mouth. When the EMT stepped inside, the little one buried her face deeper into Katie's sweater. I knelt slowly. "Who is she?" I asked. Katie's voice was barely above a whisper. "She's my baby." She hesitated, then added something quieter. "He protects us." Like it was a phrase she'd been taught. A rule. The trauma counselor, Dr. Lena Ortiz, arrived within the hour. She entered gently, voice low, nothing in her hands. Told Katie she wasn't police. Said she was just there to listen. They spoke in fragments, yes or no questions. Katie answered some. Asked for water. Said the baby could have milk. Said she'd sit on the bed, but only if she could hold her. The child didn't speak, but she watched everything. When a small stuffed giraffe was offered, she reached for it, then clung to it like she'd never seen a toy before. By dawn, Katie allowed them to check her pulse. An EMT touched her wrist gently, counting silently. She didn't flinch, just stared ahead blank like the moment hadn't reached her yet. At 7:10, they walked her to the ambulance. She wore a gray blanket over her shoulders. The child clung to her hip-stuffed giraffe in one hand. At the edge of the lot, Mallory sat in the cruiser. Silent now. His head turned as she passed. Katie stopped, froze. I stepped between them. "Look at me," I said quietly. "Not him." She did. For just a second. Then climbed into the ambulance, never looking back. At Mercy General, they gave her a private exam room. The child lay asleep on her chest while the doctors ran vitals and assessments. Dr. Singerman read quietly from the chart. Body weight 15% below expected range. Multiple old fractures now healed, scarring on wrists and forearms, signs of malnutrition, defensive wounds, iron deficiency, delayed speech. When Ortiz told her gently that the baby would recover with care and time, Katie let out a sound I couldn't place, something between a sigh and a collapse. She nodded. Just once, then didn't speak again for a while. Later that morning, Singerman looked up from a folder. "Detective Brenner," he said. I stepped forward. He hesitated before speaking. The paternity screen came back. "The child's biological father is Reed Mallory." I didn't react. Not visibly. I just said, "I see." Then walked back to the corner and sat. Katie didn't ask questions. But she knew. I could see it in the way her jaw tightened every time someone said his name. She held her daughter tighter then, pulled the blanket higher, like she was still trying to keep something out. But the door was closed now. The locks were on the right side, and outside that sterile white room the walls had begun to hold again. It wasn't justice yet, but it was something. And in that quiet, I knew what I had to do next. Find her mother. Let her see what was still here. Let her see that her daughter hadn't disappeared. She'd been taken. And now, after 14 years, she'd finally been found. Margaret was already in the waiting room when I stepped out of the ER bay. She'd come alone, still wearing the same navy cardigan, same quiet posture like she'd folded herself small in order to wait. I didn't say anything at first. Just sat beside her, the sliding doors behind us opening and closing with every new arrival. She didn't ask if it was real. Didn't ask if it was over. She just looked at me and said, "Is she all right?" I told her Katie was safe, that she was getting care, that she'd need time but she'd survived. Margaret didn't cry. She nodded once and stood. "Can I see her?" I made a quick call to Dr. Ortiz, and we walked back together through the hospital corridor, past the vending machines and the half-lit signs for pediatrics and behavioral health. The room they'd given Katie was small but clean. She sat propped up against two pillows, the baby asleep in the crook of her arm. One hand cradled the stuffed giraffe. Her hair had been combed, but still carried the knots from too many nights on the floor. Her eyes tracked the movement before the door fully opened. Margaret stopped in the doorway. She didn't step forward. She just looked. Katie blinked once, then again. The silence stretched too long to be casual. I stepped back. Margaret said, "Hi." Her voice was soft but steady. "I'm your mother." Katie's grip on the blanket tightened. She didn't answer. The little girl stirred, whimpered, then resettled. "Your name is Katie," Margaret said. She reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. "This was you. Christmas morning. You got a red sweater, said it was too itchy. But you wore it anyway." Katie looked at the photo but didn't reach for it. Margaret placed it on the table between them beside the water cup. "I used to sing to you at night," she said. "That Elvis song, 'Can't Help Falling in Love.' You'd hum along before you fell asleep." Katie's jaw moved like she was about to speak, but nothing came out. Then she said, so quiet, I almost missed it. "He said you forgot me." Her gaze stayed low. He said no one was looking. Margaret stepped forward then. "I never stopped." Katie's knees gave and she folded forward into her mother's arms, the blanket slipping as she buried her face in Margaret's chest. Later that afternoon they sat in a small room with a social worker and a notepad between them. Forms to fill out, systems to re-enter. I stayed near the door. Not in it, just near. The child sat on Katie's lap, fingers tangled in the edge of her mother's sleeve. The counselor asked gently, "Does the child have a name?" Katie hesitated. The girl blinked up at her. She was never called anything Katie said. He didn't want her to have one. Margaret reached out, placed a hand on Katie's back just between her shoulders. Katie looked down at the little girl again. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." 3 weeks later, I drove past the Deming apartment just after sunset. The front door had been repainted a soft gray, the numbers replaced with new brass ones. Potted flowers sat on either side of the stoop. There was no crowd, no press. Just the three of them, Margaret, Katie, and the child on the front porch. Katie was brushing Hope's hair slow and careful. Margaret handed her a glass of juice, then sat beside them, hand resting on her knee. It was quiet, still, real. I didn't get out of the car, just stayed across the street, engine off. Then a knock on the window. I jumped. Margaret stood there calm. I rolled it down. She didn't smile, just looked at me for a long moment. "Thank you for bringing her back to me," she said. That's all I ever wanted." I nodded. No words came. Back at the station, the prosecutor's office was building the case. Mallory had refused to speak since the arrest, but the lab results didn't need his cooperation. DNA matched on the satchel, on the clothing, the baby. The ID trail showed years of planning, identity fraud, interstate flight, evidence of confinement. Rachel Myers's death had been ruled a homicide, blunt force trauma likely struck before burial. Her remains had been wrapped hastily, covered in refuse, left beneath cracked pavers inside a shed no one visited. The charges came in one wave: first-degree murder, kidnapping, rape of a minor, unlawful imprisonment obstruction, and identity fraud. No deals were offered, no chance of parole. The weight of it felt heavier on paper than in the room, but it held. I sat with him once, just to hear him speak. One interview, 2 agents posted behind him, the table clean except for the file I carried. He looked thinner than when we'd taken him, face pale, hands folded like he was waiting for something. I laid a photo in front of him, Rachel's remains outlined in plastic, the denim jacket, discolored bones, small. "That girl was trouble," he said, voice flat. "Always crying, always trying to run." I asked if he killed her. He shrugged. "She wanted to leave." I didn't answer that, just sat still. He looked up then. "Katie stayed," he said. "She understood. I gave her more than anyone ever did." I stood, closed the file. That was all I needed to hear. Weeks passed. Katie began to eat more, walk outside again. Hope learned how to say her name, sometimes loud, sometimes in a whisper. One afternoon, when I stopped by to deliver paperwork, Katie opened the door herself. She didn't say much, just took the envelope and thanked me. Her hair had grown in around the edges. Her sleeves fit. Hope tugged at her leg and asked for her giraffe. Katie picked her up without effort. Later that evening, I stood outside the station watching the sun fade behind the line of low buildings that framed the courthouse. I thought about the shed, the broken crates, the satchel, all those years. All that time folded in on itself, hidden beneath concrete and rust and weeds, and somehow, even after everything, she was still here. Not whole, not healed, but alive. And for now, that was enough. The trial date was still pending, but the evidence held. And in the meantime, Katie had a bed, a lock that turned from the inside, a daughter with a name, and a mother who'd waited for 14 years just to bring her home. It was nearly 2 months after Katie came home when I got the call from Louisville PD. A storage unit rented under one of Reed Mallory's known aliases had defaulted on payment. The facility manager said the lock was cut per policy, and when they opened the door, they knew immediately to back out and call it in. I drove down that same afternoon. The lot sat just off a highway access road, rows of units with rusted latches and dented doors, a chain-link fence circling the entire perimeter. The air smelled like sun-warmed metal and old paint. Unit 117 was already taped off when I arrived. A uniformed officer nodded me through. Inside it took a second for my eyes to adjust. Then I saw them boxes, dozens of them, all labeled by hand with masking tape. Some had girls' names. Others were just numbered. One sat open near the front. Inside were books, children's books mostly. "Goodnight Moon," "Where the Sidewalk Ends." A photograph tucked between them showed a young girl sitting cross-legged holding a yellow balloon. She wasn't smiling. Her name was written on the back, Rachel, age 9. We logged each box into evidence: jewelry, hairbrushes, torn notebooks, drawings with dates scrawled in the corners. Some matched names already in our missing persons database. Others didn't. The far back wall had a filing cabinet, heavy and rusted. We pried it open on site. Inside were folders labeled with dates, Street names, medical records. He'd been tracking them, documenting weight, height, what they ate, how they slept. There were sections for discipline, sections for progress, and one labeled termination. Each folder ended with a final page marked with a red stamp, either relocated or resolved. My hands started to shake halfway through the third drawer. The forensic team found something else beneath the cabinet. A false floor panel nailed down and reinforced with steel brackets. It took 2 agents and a crowbar to pull it loose. Underneath was a crawl space maybe 4 feet deep. They lowered a camera and used a light wand to scan the interior. What they found made everyone go silent. Clothing, dolls, blankets rolled into nests, plastic dishes. A single plastic potty chair stained with age. It looked like children had been kept there hidden for long stretches. One corner had tally marks scratched into the plywood. I counted 58. A few were crossed out. Later that evening, I drove to see Micah. He'd kept his distance since the arrest, staying mostly in the house where he grew up, fixing things that didn't need fixing. When I pulled into the gravel drive, he was out front painting a stair rail. The brush paused in his hand when he saw me. I stepped out slowly. "There's something you need to know," I said. "Something we found." I told him about the unit, the boxes, the records. I didn't mention the crawl space. Not yet. He listened without moving. Then he said, "He always had a room we couldn't go in. Said it was for taxes. Said not to touch his files." I asked if he'd ever seen the girls. He hesitated. "Not directly," he said. "But sometimes I'd hear voices. Small ones. Thought maybe it was the TV. Or maybe I just didn't want to know." Back at the station, I cross-checked the files from the unit with open cases going back 20 years. Some were girls reported missing from Kentucky and Ohio. A few had closed status, presumed runaways, no follow-up. At least 3 had matching details but no attached names. We flagged them for DNA testing. Rachel Myers was among them, but there were others. Malia Groves, last seen 2003, walking home from school. Sophie Dean disappeared in 2008 from a campground. Each name brought another call to another family, another mother who'd never had a grave to visit. We started to understand just how many people he had cycled through his life, how long he'd been doing this. I returned to the evidence room that night alone. One box stood out. It wasn't labeled. Inside was a cassette tape dated June 2009. We didn't even have a working player in the office anymore. I drove it to a friend at the university archive. We sat in a sound booth while he queued it up. The audio started with static, then footsteps. A door creaked open. Then a voice. Katie's. Younger. Softer. She sounded scared. "Please," she said. "I'll be good." A man's voice answered Reed. "You'll stay because I say you stay. That's how this works." Then silence. Then the sound of the door locking. The tape ran for 5 more minutes. Just her breathing, then crying. I asked him to stop it. He did. The next morning I brought the tape to Dr. Ortiz. She played it for Katie with consent. Margaret sat beside her during the playback. When it ended, Katie didn't speak. Just reached for Hope's hand. "I thought that was gone," she said quietly. "He recorded things. He said it was proof that I'd forget what life was like before him." She looked up. But I didn't. I remembered my mom's voice. I remembered sunlight on the porch. I remembered that red sweater. She held Hope closer. And now she'll remember me. The case was no longer just about one missing girl. It had become a pattern, a system, a network of lies and manipulation held together by silence. Reed had built his own world, one where names were erased and voices didn't matter. But the tapes changed that. So did the boxes. So did the courage it took for one woman to survive and then speak. We brought in a federal profiling team. They built a timeline from his earliest recorded alias 1987 to the present. 38 girls confirmed, possibly more. Some had been returned under different names, others never traced. A few were assumed dead. But for every piece of paper in that unit, there was now a door to open, a cold case to revisit, a family to notify. That night I found myself sitting outside the evidence locker lights, dim files stacked around me like bricks. I closed the folder on Sophie Dean. The next one said Natalie, possibly Indiana, age 10. There was no last name, just a drawing in crayon, a house, a girl, a swing set, no sky, no sun. I stared at it for a long time. We weren't finished, not even close. But the truth was surfacing box by box, voice by voice. The more we uncovered, the more we understood this wasn't just a rescue. It was an excavation. And beneath everything, the horror ran deeper than we'd thought. But Katie was out. Hope was safe. And now we had names. We had proof. And finally, we had a map. It was raining the morning they brought Reed into federal custody. No sirens, no shouting. Just a plain transport van pulling up to the back lot, 2 marshals guiding him inside like he was anyone else. He didn't resist, didn't ask for a lawyer, just kept his eyes low and hands folded like it was all routine. I watched from the second-floor window, coffee cooling in my hand, trying to feel something I thought I would relief maybe. But it didn't come. Not right away. Because arrests are never the end. They're just the moment where everything you've learned has to hold up under weight. And we had to be sure that weight wouldn't crack in court. The task force was split across states by then, Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana, chasing down tips, confirming names, putting together timelines. It wasn't a single case anymore. It was a pattern stitched together by girl after girl, each one carrying a sliver of the truth. The FBI ran voice prints from the tapes we'd recovered. 2 matched recordings in open child exploitation cases from 2005 and 2011. Another was traced back to a voicemail left on a tip line in Arkansas, never followed up. We pulled that file too. Everything had to be cross-checked, cataloged, and prepared for court. Reed had operated under at least 6 names. He'd moved through trailer parks, small towns, seasonal jobs, always just enough to avoid notice. And each time he started over, he took someone else's future with him. Katie came back to the station once during those early days of prep. Not for questioning, just to sit to see the boxes to know the story wasn't being buried again. She stood by the evidence shelves in silence, reading the names scrawled on masking tape. "I thought I was alone," she said. "Turns out I was part of something bigger. That doesn't make it better. But it makes it real." I asked if she wanted to testify. She looked at me like I already knew the answer. He kept my voice in a box for years. Now I want to use it on my own terms. And she did. Her testimony was quiet, measured, and clear. She didn't cry. She didn't falter. She spoke like someone who'd already lived the worst day of her life and come out the other side with nothing left to hide. Margaret sat behind her in the courtroom every day of the trial. I don't think she ever unclenched her fists, but she never left. Hope stayed with a family friend during the proceedings, too young to understand the words being said, but not too young to feel the weight in the room. We limited what the jury heard. Some of the tapes, some of the photos, some of the details were sealed to protect the surviving victims. But enough came through to show the scope of what Reed had done. The manipulation. The planning. The silence he counted on. Micah testified too. He brought a stack of notebooks Reed had left behind, half-finished repair logs, journal entries, lists of girls' birthdays with asterisks beside some names. He admitted what he'd missed, what he ignored. The defense tried to press him, asked why he never reported anything earlier. He didn't deflect. He said, "Because I didn't want to believe it, and because I was a coward." There wasn't a sound in the courtroom after that. just the slow turning of notebook pages. The jury came back unanimous guilty on all primary counts with additional charges pending in multiple jurisdictions. Reed didn't speak during sentencing. No apology, no explanation. Just stood there as the judge read the years, over 200 by the end of it. Margaret kept her gaze steady. Katie turned her face toward the window. But sentencing isn't justice. Not really. Not when the harm stretched so far, so long, and so quietly. What came after were the smaller things, the ones that mattered more than the headlines. The reopening of 13 cold cases across 5 counties. The matching of DNA to families who'd waited decades. The memorial for the girls who were never found. Margaret helped organize that. She said it wasn't for closure. It was so no one could say they didn't know anymore. Katie started working with a recovery organization that supports survivors of long-term abduction. She kept her name. Didn't change it, didn't hide. Said she was done letting someone else write her story. Hope started school that fall. Margaret walks her there most mornings. On the first day, she carried a lunchbox with cartoon owls and held her grandma's hand so tight you could see the imprint hours later. Sometimes I still get calls from counties asking for files. Other times it's families wanting to know if their daughter was on one of the tapes, one of the lists. Some are. Most aren't. There's always more than what makes it to court. A few weeks ago, I got a letter from a girl in Oklahoma. Said she'd seen the trial on the news. Said she recognized the man's voice. Said she'd run away in 2004, and no one believed her when she said why. She didn't give a name, just an address. I passed it to the local PD. Haven't heard back yet. The truth is, even after the sentencing, it doesn't end. Not for the victims, not for the families, not for the ones who were told they were imagining things. But something changed. It was harder now to ignore, harder to bury. And sometimes that's the only kind of justice you get, the kind that keeps the door from closing again. Outside my office, the evidence boxes are still lined up in a backroom shelf. We don't lock that door anymore. People come in to read through them. Students, advocates, sometimes survivors. There's one box near the end labeled Unmatched, Unknown. Inside is a small red shoe. Faded. No name, no date. Just a note tucked beside it. Found near Hart's Crossing, 1992. We still don't know who she was. But we keep the light on. We keep the file open. Because someone out there might. And when they're ready, we'll be here. I still think about that shed sometimes, the smell of mildew, the way the light barely reached the back corner, the cold metal shelf where Katie's satchel had been tucked away for decades. It's strange how quiet evil can be, how something so terrible can sit still for years unnoticed, untouched, waiting for someone to finally see it. But even now, after the trial, after all the headlines faded, what stays with me most isn't what we found. It's what was carried through it, what survived. Katie's living in a new place now. Nothing big, just a small apartment near the river. She's got a part-time job and a rescue dog that never leaves her side. Sometimes she writes. Sometimes she speaks at high schools just quietly without press or attention. She told me once she doesn't want to be remembered for what was done to her. She wants to be remembered for getting out. I think that's fair. Margaret still visits the station from time to time, usually with Hope. The kid's grown fast, curious, serious-eyed, always holding her grandma's hand like it's the most normal thing in the world. And maybe for them it is. Margaret doesn't talk much about those years, but every now and then, if you catch her alone in the hallway, she'll look up at the old bulletin board we keep in the back, the one with missing person flyers from as far back as the 70s, and her eyes will land on Katie's photo. She won't say anything, just nod like she's checking to make sure it's still there. Micah moved west. Last I heard, he was working as a mechanic outside of Reno. He still sends me boxes, sometimes odds and ends, from places he used to live, hoping something in them might match another case. I don't know if he's looking for redemption or just trying to keep his hands busy. But every time I see his handwriting on one of those labels, I think of the day he opened that filing cabinet and chose to tell the truth. That mattered, maybe more than anything. We still get calls. Not as many as before, but enough. People asking about old cases, old voices. Sometimes it's someone who's been holding on to a memory for too long. Sometimes it's a name scribbled in the margin of an old notebook. Every once in a while, it's a girl who was told years ago that nothing happened, that she must have made it up. And when they call, we answer. We listen. Because now there's a record. Now there's proof. And that changes everything. You don't always get full justice. Some names stay unclaimed. Some parents never get the answer they were waiting for. But truth has a weight to it. Once it's out, it settles into the world in a way that's hard to ignore. That's what this case gave us. Not peace exactly, but permanence. We know what happened, and we know who it happened to. Katie's name isn't lost anymore. Neither are the others. And that in the end might be the most any of us can ask for, that when the silence breaks, someone's there to listen. Someone's there to write it down. Someone's there to remember. If this story stayed with you, consider sharing it so no name gets left behind.